welcome to class. It's week 7 of DBA700, and we are rounding the final turn and headed for the finish line. All right, this week is going to be a very short presentation, a very short lecture, because we don't have a lot of extra assignments. Kind of what we're doing is starting to finish up on this literature review by having our peer review session, and we only have one reading. Okay, it's in the Start Here section in week 7 readings, the folder, and it's called Writing for Scholarly Publication as a Contribution to Scholarly Conversation by Anne Sigsmund from 1998. Now that seems like a long time ago, almost 20 years, but in many ways, although maybe the technology has changed somewhat in terms of how we write and how we use our library resources, to a large extent the process of writing and coming up with good ideas, original ideas, developing strong arguments has not changed at all. So that's going to be the only reading for this week. Now the assignment I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about because it might seem a little bit confusing. As I said, the main purpose here is we're going to be reviewing the papers that people put in their discussion session. Okay, so you're going to critique the papers that people are placing there, and then placing your peer review checklist into this week's discussion post. So you're going to put your checklists, your critiques with additional comments, and you're going to use as a subject line who the author's name is so we know which paper you're reviewing. And you're going to post those, and then we'll be discussing your posts. Both the author can bring in comments and you can bring in additional comments. And I think by the end of the week I'd like everybody to have reviewed at least 2 different papers. Okay? And I want to make sure everybody's paper gets reviewed, so if there turn out to be too many all reviewing the same paper, I'll say, okay, you need to review so-and-so's paper because they don't have any reviews yet. So before you start reviewing, you just might want to check to see whose paper has been reviewed, so you're reviewing something new. In fact, it might be a good idea for your first discussion post to write which paper you're going to review first, to make sure that everybody else won't be reviewing the same paper, and then subsequently you'll turn in the checklist, and then we should have a complete list by Tuesday evening. Okay, so everybody should have at least one review. Okay, so that's the idea, is you're going to put your checklists into the discussion post so we can see them. You're also going to post those checklists into the week 7 paper so that I can grade them. Okay, so they're going to go into 2 different places. You're going to go put your review into the discussion post. That'll be underneath your thread, but the subject will be the paper that you're reviewing, the author of that paper. Okay, so Cortland may be reviewing James' paper, and Francis may be reviewing Christopher's paper. So we'll see that different people are reviewing different papers, and that everybody should get a review on their paper. And then by the end of Sunday, you pick another paper and review that one, so that we'll be able to compare reviews, because as we saw with the previous papers that we looked at, people will pick up on different things. There's not one single way that's the right way, so they'll see different things, and this should provide you, as you go into your final draft for the final assignment, the week 8 paper, you should be able to use both my feedback coming on your paper as well as your classmates' feedback coming on your paper to see where you're strong, where you're weak, what things need to be changed. Okay, so that's the assignment for the discussion. If that's confusing, send me ask questions so that I can kind of straighten things out. And as I said, the week 7 paper is simply a copy of this checklist that you've put in the discussion post. That's going to then go into the week 7 paper. And yes, you can submit more than one. All right, so now I just like to spend just a short period of time talking about the reading that you got for this week. And the reason that I put it in there, I mean, you've certainly got enough to do with reviewing your classmates' papers, but I think it's about time to kind of come to some summary or some sort of conclusion about, so what were we doing this past 7 or 8 weeks? What's been the point of this whole thing? And of course, it may seem like, well, we're just learning how to write in a particular style, but it's more than that, really. And as the article states, to become an academic, which is what a doctoral program is targeted for, go into this particular field, you really want to be able to contribute to a scientific ongoing conversation in a particular academic field. Okay, so science is about conversations. Most of the conversation occurs through the journals. Now you might say, well, I'm in the business. Business is not a science. Business is part of social science, and we have scholarly journals that do scientific type studies. We may not be, measuring the speed of an electron, or measuring how far away the furthest star is. That's a different kind of science, but our science deals with human beings and organizations and things like motivation and things like leadership. So it may be a little messier than the boiling point of water, or what exactly the orbit of the moon is around the Earth, but it's still developing towards an understanding of certain facts and certain theories and certain things that can be relied upon because they seem to work a certain way. So what you want to do is become part of that conversation in a particular area that you're going to focus on, and that conversation is through writing. Yes, people sometimes go to conferences and present papers and talk a little bit, but they're presenting something that they've written. It's not something that they're making up and sitting down. Yes, you can have casual conversations with your colleagues about certain things, and that develops your understanding and their understanding of certain ideas, but in the end, it's all going to be based upon writing. And if you want to become part of the scientific conversation in your particular field, you've got to learn how to write in an academic style. And that's really what this course is about, and what really your whole program is going to be about. You'll learn certain topics, you'll learn certain subject areas, but it's always for the purpose of being able to write something about it that is interesting, that contributes to the field. A second thing that Ms. Sigsman says in her article is that writing equals thinking. And I'm a firm believer in this. I think once you start writing things down and rereading what you've written, your way of thinking about it will change. Okay, and that's why we have multiple drafts, because as you write things out, it's different than if you were talking. It's different than the thoughts jumbling around in your own mind. Writing, especially according to an academic style, forces you to put things in certain order and to develop certain sorts of logic and to be able to explain things more thoroughly than you would have to if you're just talking to somebody, you're just thinking to yourself. So that's why we revise things, we go back and we look at more literature, then we think about it again, then we write some more, then we go back and think about what we've written, and we put it in a different order. And so writing is a very important part of understanding something, not just communicating something, but it's an important part of understanding something. Then she mentions subject domain, and although it's a little vague exactly what she means here, it's something that I actually tell students as they're entering into the doctoral program to keep in the forefront of their minds, because many students come in and their first class they think they know what they're going to do their dissertation on. They know their field of research. And I tell them, you don't even know what the field is. You may have identified a particular thing of interest. I have students come and tell me they want to, their field of interest is they know how to beat the stock market, or they know how to, they're worried about international cybersecurity. Well, those are certainly ideas. However, to work in a specific area, you need to know the existing theory, and you need to build your particular research approach based upon what's been done before. So when she talks about subject domain, she's really saying tend to keep an open mind about things, because your educational process, your doctoral classes, will be opening new doors to new fields that you probably didn't even know existed. And for example, in this class, the amount of knowledge you now have about human motivation should be substantially different than what you knew about or thought about human motivation when you started the class. You knew your own feeling about it, you know your own opinions, but now you know a lot more about what's been done in the field and what sort of studies have been done and what sort of theories have been presented. That's going to be the same thing as you progress through your program as you learn into different fields of finance and international business and management and strategy. There's going to be various areas that you thought you knew about, and you probably know something, but you're going to find that there's a whole body of information and literature out there that's delved into it much more deeply than you have. And so you got to not narrow your interests into one thing, especially in the beginning of your program. You got to sort of look at the alternatives and know what sort of things you're interested in, and kind of keep that there, but remain open to other alternatives, other things that you could do. Conversants facilitate written contribution. Now, this seems like a fairly awkward phrase, but what she's talking about here is the people engaged in this conversation of science will then facilitate or augment written contributions. So the more you communicate with people in your particular field about the things that you're interested in, the things you're working on, the more that's going to contribute to the field itself. And as I said underneath the first part, science is conversation. So if you think of all these people in the field that are talking about human motivation over the past 50 or 60 years, they're engaged in a conversation about this topic. Now they're adding different pieces to it, but if you start to study it as we have in a literature review, and start to study it from the beginning with Maslow and Hertzberg, McGregor and those people, and start following this stream of literature, this body of literature through the ages, you see, yes, this conversation has gotten quite a bit more sophisticated and developed than it was when the first hierarchy of needs was proposed. And so it's this conversation that then builds the field. And the other side of this whole story is the way you write, the mechanics, being able to write in a particular style, using correct grammar, developing a evidence-based argument, having a strong thesis statement, a good conclusion, having a successful logic that ties your paper together. Those are all necessary. Okay, it's like going to a foreign country, and you may have a lot of ideas about things, but if you can't speak the language, you can't really communicate with anybody. So the writing mechanics are like the language of science, and part of what we've been doing in this class is learning how those apply, what the rules are, what the conventions are, and practicing how to do it. So I think you'll find this article interesting and a good reflection upon what we've been doing in this particular class, and what my overall intention is as you move forward and start taking other classes. So you'll see me again in different classes, and we'll use this as the foundation, and then we'll be adding different topics on top of that. So the keys to success. In scholarly writing, quality is more important than quantity. I will set page numbers and say I want to have 6 to 8 pages, or I want to have 10 to 12 pages, because in my mind I don't think you can do a good job on what I want at that stage in a lot less. So you might say, well, what if I write 2 really good dense pages? I would say I don't think you can cover 20 different articles and the main ideas from those articles in 2 pages. You're barely going to have a good introduction, and you won't even have a conclusion. So the page estimates that I supply as the targets are meant to indicate the amount of effort, but also the amount of literature that I want to have referenced in the development of the ideas. But on the other hand, I don't want to see 12 pages that don't say anything or repeat the same thing over and over again. Unlike our fellow here who's going to type every word that he knows. I expect you to make use of the readings as references when you do your critiques. Why is this right? Why is this wrong? Keep the focus on your writing confined to the topic. Okay, many times people start out with one idea but then start wandering around. Try to define your terms. Don't include something even though you may say, well, I know what it is and I expect Dr. Parsons knows what it is. Well, I may know what it is, but if it's something that a general audience would not know, be sure you define exactly what you mean by it, because many of these commonly used terms mean something totally different when they're used in an academic sense. For example, something like leadership. Well, you might say everybody knows what leadership is. Everybody could point to an example of leadership. But when you actually look at the literature on leadership, you'll find that there are many different definitions, and there are many different theories related to leadership. So you really need to, when you're when you're trying to write in an academic scholarly style, you need to be careful and define your terms, and you'll see me comment on your papers also. Don't throw in spurious sentences and paragraphs that don't have anything to do with the topic and don't complete the logic of the story, the narrative that you're trying to tell. So make sure that everything counts for something. As I have written on a number of papers, say at the end of each paragraph, ask yourself, so what? What did this paragraph actually tell the reader that is important to my thesis, to arguing my thesis? If you haven't written what it means, how would you expect the reader to know what it means? Okay, so a lot of times they'll see paragraphs that end with a citation, and I don't know what that citation is referring to. The whole paragraph? Was that the whole thing somebody else's idea? And if it was, so what? What does that mean to your argument? That's what they said, but don't leave it up to the reader to try to figure out, well, so what did this article, what did this paragraph have to do with the argument this person is trying to make? They're not telling me what it does. It would be like in the court if the lawyer simply held up a gun and said, here's a gun. And the jury would say, well, so what? And that lawyer would then hold up some DNA results. Here's some DNA. So what? What does it do to your case? You have to explain that to the reader. Oh, simplify your writing. Many times I find sentences that have multiple clauses or are kind of backwards, as if the writer, just started writing the sentence and then decided, well, I want to have this in there too, and then maybe I could put this in there too. Try to make your sentences simpler and more direct. Try to use active voice. If you've got two different ideas you're trying to get across, put those in separate sentences. And I think it's a good idea. You may have a preliminary introduction, but I would say go back and write your introduction after your paper is finished, after you've finished the argument, the body of the paper. And the same thing with the conclusion. After you've read it through a few times and you've strengthened the argument, then you go to your conclusion and say, well, I think this is really what I've said. This is what I'm adding new to my understanding of this particular field. When you're finished, reread your paper, and you should be able to say, this is quality. That's what I want to say when I review your papers. Well, that's about it. This is a short one, so until next time, goodbye and good luck.